where do I come in? I know that generally when the topic of leadership or the word leadership comes in, people run for the hills in our industry. And it's generally because the topic is very dry, it's very academic, it is very confusing. We're not going to talk about academics today. We're going to talk about things that happen every day in your space where you can say, hey, I'm learning something, that I know something today that I didn't know yesterday. It has to be tangible that you can carry away. So we're not going to get into the topic of leadership and the different types and what you have to do and where you have to go to learn this. This is something for anybody in this room, okay? So thank you very much for attending. A bit about me. I spent 20 years in the legal industry in Germany, originally from Germany, and also in the US, and very, very hard place for people to function. Believe it or not, it's a very toxic environment for people. I came to New Zealand and changed industries completely, came into construction. And I realized, wow, what a difference. The construction industry is filled with absolute salt-of-the-earth people. And I think one thing I noticed, I ran a civil construction company. The penny dropped when I realized that our 28-ton digger was regularly serviced. It had hydraulics fluids done, it had hoses done, it had engine checks, it was monitored for, make sure it had its rest and was cleaned. What about the driver? Nobody ever asked him, how are you doing? Do you need anything? Is this what you want to do? You've been doing it for 25 years. You can open a Coke can with the shovel of your digger, but is this really what you want to do? Because you're obviously good at it. So it occurred to me that as businesses, we spend a whole lot more time, energy, and money on taking care of physical plant than the people that are operating the physical plant. And Brigitte just mentioned human assets. I'm actually a business major, so I'm not coming just from the warm and fuzzy side. What I want to talk about today is connecting taking care of our people to business performance. Learning. I just completed an MBA. Yes, I'm not the youngest in the room, but I realized that, yes, I've done something for a number of years, and I'm reasonably good at it. People pay me for it, but there is something that I'm probably missing. So I went back and did a master's degree. You don't have to do that. But where the penny dropped for me is I connected the people element to the business element. And ultimately, when we're talking about our environment, whether that is Kata supplying supplies, the architect who supplies the drawings and the design, the construction company who actually makes it all come together, we're all in it for a tangible reason, that's revenue. So this talk that I wanted is I just want to get everybody thinking today that people, business, performance, and still having your personal goals met is possible. It is possible. So I'm a CEO for Accent Management. Accent Management is a consultancy. We have different industry consultants, but my specialty is in construction and professional services. And again, when we're looking at business performance, we look at, is there a human element? How is your staff performing? Are they engaged? Or are they just there to do their job and then go home? Are they there all of it? Or are they just there part of the time, part of their capacity? So we kind of look at the whole thing. So the question in leadership often comes up, Well, there's some people that are just natural leaders, right? Any ideas, who would you think is a natural leader? Any ideas? Just shout them out. Charles Branson? Is Branson a natural leader? He built an empire. People like working for him, right? I mean, those are kind of, you think, okay, but guess what? There is no personality trait or a DNA or some sort of an inherited trait that makes you a leader. We're going to turn that thought on its head today. So Peter Drucker is a very well-known U.S. Business personality, ran actually some of the most influential strategy courses in business schools in the US. And he said, there may be some born leaders, but there are too few of them for us to count on them. And that's true. And the reason you spent your time and your afternoon and your money with us today, and thank you very much for that, is to learn how you can do something better that might have a better outcome than what you've done in the past. So let's get started. We're going to talk about these broad topics today. First, we're going to look at our industry, very briefly, just the numbers. Then we're going to talk about culture. We're going to introduce the introduction to leadership, goal alignment, and then finally teams. And no, we're going to have a little bit of a break in between there. I'm not going to torture you from A to Z without a break. So construction industry numbers. This is kind of really important. So we are the third largest employer in New Zealand. Average hourly rate for construction workers, $36.88 an hour. So very costly. Fifth largest contributor to the local economy, 6.3% of the GDP in 2023 equates to $17.6 billion. This is a huge factor in our economy. 613,000 businesses. 13.3% of the New Zealand total businesses registered are in our industry. And we employ over 308,000 people. You want to talk about assets. When we go back to our humans, our people are our assets, that is one heck of an asset base. Productivity level, on the other hand, has been absolutely stagnant and has only grown by 1% since 1996. What does that number tell us? That number tells us the value in commercial terms that each labor hour produces. Well, since 1996, you think we have better equipment, we have better methodology, we have more efficient ways of doing things. Why are we not being more efficient? We'll see about that in a minute. So the other aspect, now this is a global figure. Construction has one of the lowest profit margins in all industry sectors, 4.4%. So that's pretty, if you look at the pharmaceutical medical devices, and by example having 19.8, that's a shocking number. So we are very lean. This is a very lean environment. There's not a whole lot of room for financial errors. Okay? So that's what this tells us. So you're saying, so what? What does that have to do with culture and leadership? Well, we're going back a step. So that profit base comes largely from people. You can have that digger, but without that driver, that digger is useless. It's not doing anything. Without that carpenter on site, no framing gets done. Without that project manager managing the people and the project, there is nothing's going to happen, right? So we're looking briefly, and this is going to be a topic that I've actually done my thesis on, so it's a very big topic. We're not going to go into detail on this, but just briefly, what is culture? Culture is that thing that we all know when it's not right, but we don't really know how to fix it. So I've dissected this a little bit, and we're looking at values. The values are the starting point, and those are the corporate values. Those are the values that start with the founders of a company. They exist in the boardroom. The senior leadership team, they sit there and say, what do we want? How do we want to conduct our business, right? Those values are communicated in behaviors. Those behaviors are the everyday interaction between people, between suppliers, between subcontractors, between the client, between all of your stakeholders. The mindset, that behavior, at some point when you do something often enough, and I'm going back to George's example of a sports analogy, if you do something often enough, the more you do it, the better you become at it. Why is that? Because you build muscle memory, and if it's a physical thing, if it is a mental thing, you have a mindset shift, a paradigm shift. And at some point, it becomes second nature. You no longer have to think about doing it. So that mindset follows that behavior. The mindset lives in that ethos of the company, and the leadership has to take that mindset. They really have to get into that mindset space. And this is why you're all here. You're here either because you are leading people, you have someone that you're managing who leads people, you are leading yourself. So even if there was an apprentice in the room, it's appropriate because guess what? He's leading himself. That person who puts the boots on every morning, that's self-leadership. So that leadership, we want to build on authenticity. When you have authenticity, when you say, hey, look, you know what? We are actually real people. You don't have to take on a persona. Who here is an Oscar-winning actor? Anyone? No one? Okay, I'm not either. So the reason I'm asking that question is because leadership a lot of times is the thought of taking on another hat. You take on a persona, you put into a new pair of boots or whatever, and you go to perform a task as that person. That is not sustainable. So the leadership we're after is about you, all of you. And that starts with your own personal values. That authentic leadership style, and that is uniquely suited to our industry. We don't want to put robots out there. We want people to engage with us based on who they really are. If I look at someone and say, okay, I know that person is going to give me feedback, I know that person. I know exactly how I'm supposed to interpret it. But if this person is this person today, and then they put their leadership persona on, and they become someone completely different, I'm going to get really confused. And guess what? That does not build trust. And trust is that thing that is the cornerstone of culture. So culture is the way we feel on a Sunday night at the thought of going to work on Monday morning. Now, some of us have been in roles where that was like, yep, I'm ready to go. I've got my day mapped out tomorrow. I'm excited. And that's great. And there are times when we've been in a role where we were like, darn, is it already Sunday night again? Okay, well, better get my mindset on. So when we're looking at what is important, we're looking at leadership, how leadership impacts the organizational culture. And when we're talking about organizational culture, I don't mean just corporate organizational culture. I'm talking about site culture. I'm talking about office culture. I'm talking about team culture. Culture is not one big thing. It can be as small as a 2-person team. They have a culture. So we're looking at authentic leadership, which builds trust. That is the top of that pyramid. That is where we're headed. In order to get there, we have to have leadership that's a conduit to transmitting those values from the bottom up, developing a learning mindset, knowing that, hey, look, I may be really fantastic project manager or site manager or architect or this or that, but there are things that I'm probably not so good at, right? So maybe I can learn something. If you approach life from that aspect, if you take nothing else away today, but say, hey, I actually am learning something. So today was not a waste of my time. That makes me super happy. That's all I'm asking of you today, okay? So transmission of those values, that's that behavior. So this is just kind of, it all comes back down to what is the value set. Now, when we talk about culture, organizational culture, that is the company that you guys work for, the company that you may own. It is a larger sector of culture. When we're looking at a business culture, that organizational culture, look at what research tells us, the effects of positive or negative culture on a business. What stands out?
Can you repeat the question?
What stands out when we look at all the elements that are depending or are affected by culture?
Depends on what you do as a person.
Yes, absolutely. But for the business, there is absolutely no aspect of business performance that isn't impacted by culture. That is key. So we think culture is only about people. No, culture is directly related to revenue. Culture is directly related to market share. Culture is directly related on how efficiently we work. So make no mistake, if you are employed, if you're running a business, you are a business manager, you own a business, look at your culture. Don't just assume that it's okay. It's kind of like rolling a ball uphill. You keep the momentum going. You got to keep working at it. The moment you take your hands off, guess what? It's going to run right over you and out the door. So that is culture. It takes work. It takes just as much of a strategic effort to build culture as it does to build revenue or to have market share or to build anything else. So how does revenue come about? Well, guess what? All those aspects of that effect that the organizational culture has on a business depend on employee engagement. And employee engagement is the mindset of that employee when they're at work. Now, we all have good days, we have bad days, we have days when we are, really just raring to go, and other days where we're just kind of slugging along. That's not what I'm talking about. It's the mindset. What is that person thinking? What is in there? What drives them? If they're not engaged, guess what? Your revenue is going to go down. It's as simple as that. If your employees are not engaged, your efficiency is going to go down. Your market share is going to go down. Your sustainability of your business is going to go down. So we have an interest, and this is where this leadership and that organizational culture bit is so important. We sometimes forget about it because we're and especially in the industry, we're very technically minded. We want to equate things. Well, A plus B makes C. But we sometimes forget about this little thing, this X in the conversion. and say, oh, well, hang on a second, what about X? Well, what is X? Oh, we don't know what X is. That takes a whole different calculation. Yes, that's what we want to do. That's all we want you to think about today. So don't forget about that X factor. So when I did the research for my thesis, I had the opportunity to do a lot of interviews with a lot of people in the industry. And these are some of the quotes that came out of that study. It's not all from the same company nor from the same person. This is just a cross sector, and there was also some that said, hey, look, my culture is great. But the predominant responder had one of those lines to say, and this is it's not about, oh, we're naming and shaming companies. That's not the point here. The point is that companies need to be aware that that is the perception that their employees have. Now, who works for a company where the company manager, the senior manager, actually talks to people at the coalface? Anybody? Brilliant. Yeah, you're probably the coalface and the manager. But who works for a company where they don't even really see anybody in the senior leadership team, let alone have a conversation with them? Anybody? Nobody? That's really cool. This is an example of, hey, you're working for a company where you have access to someone in that decision-making space. But a lot of those people don't. So if we're going to ask the question, for example, if we did a site survey and said, okay, which forklift driver or which digger driver has access to the CEO of a company who makes the decisions on his or her day at work? Nobody even asks him. That's the reality. We do HR surveys. A lot of companies, larger companies especially, they do HR surveys. They do pulse checks. They do forms. They want to engage with their staff. And they collect data. And then they analyze that data. And that data tells them something. But what does it tell them? We don't know. And nobody is really understanding what to do with that data. So we're going to talk briefly about leadership and what it means in your space, perspective, and wherever you are. So in our career in the industry, generally, this is a typical career progression. You come in as an entrant, whether that is an apprentice or from a university degree or whatever. You progress through technical proficiencies. And then, some point in your career, you end up in a leadership position. Well, that's great. Now that you're here, what are you doing with it? Who has had actually a career transition from technical proficiency to leadership position with appropriate skills update? Anybody? Yeah, and that's the problem. So they're asking you now to the same thing as if you gave me the keys to a digger. I can identify it. I know what it's for. Am I going to be the best driver for that digger? Probably not. I'd have to do some skill updates, right? So it's the same thing in our leadership space. And that is exactly what the key element is, understanding that you have some learning to do. The first thing we need to do, though, is understanding what leadership means. So there is a common misconception, and that is not just the industry and construction, but there's a lot of times leadership and management are used, the terms are used interchangeably, but they're actually quite different. So I want you to look at these and kind of wrap your mind around that for a second. So you see there is in that Venn diagram, that middle bit, that line management and health and safety. That is kind of where those two mindsets and skill sets overlap a little bit. Health and safety, it's a negotiable fact. You cannot talk your way, you cannot coach your way out of health and safety on a site. It's not negotiable. There are times when somebody violates the health and safety regulations, they are going to be managed, and rightfully so, because everybody's life and health depends on that. Line management. Well, if you don't show up for work, we're going to have a conversation, right? So that's the other aspect. But what this diagram shows is, one, management is more concerned about the outcome. It's a task-oriented. It's an operational mindset, okay? The other one, a leadership bit, is people-focused. So that is how you deal with people. This is not about the program, it's not about the budget, it's not about the quality, it is about the people achieving all those things. So this is the crux, here's where it starts. Leadership depends on three key things. You have to have a leader, obviously, a situation, whether that is a site, whether that is an office space, it's a team, or it's a whole company, whatever it is, or just a team of two. And then you have a follower. And that is the thing that differentiates leadership from management. Management is a title, it's an authority given to you, delegated by the company that you work for. You are a manager, so therefore you go and manage things. But when you're asking people to lead, to follow you, guess what? They can say no. And they often do. And you may not even notice it. You may not know who's actually deciding to follow you or not until things go pear-shaped. So the follower in leadership actually has the power. Think about a democratic process. We're following the US elections at the moment, right? There's a big of upheaval. So you have a president candidate and have another president candidate. People choose who they want to follow, who they want to vote for. Too bad, but you cannot force that. And it's very much the same when you deal with people. You can only convince, you can influence people, and you can get them to see that your way is actually a benefit. It has a benefit attached to it, and they see a reason to follow you, but you cannot force it. Now, a manager can force that you come to work. Now, and this is where we want to really talk about commitment versus compliance. That management space talks about that blue area. It's indifferent compliance, it's resentful obedience. That means that it's a person who comes to work because their manager makes them come to work for a paycheck. That is not where innovation is born, that is not where ideas are born, that is not where buy-in lives. So if you have commitment from your staff, they will go far beyond what you're actually paying them to do, what they're contractually obligated to do. That is the gold. So you want people to choose to come to work because they're committed to come to work, not because they're compliant. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah? Any questions so far? So we're aiming for the orange bit here, that commitment. So influence, how do you become a person of influence? And there's an acronym, I'll let you read that, and then we're just about at a break. Brigitte is gonna be giving me a signal here in a moment. But those are kind of that influence where it lives. You don't have to take notes I think we're going to share the slides with you guys afterwards, so you will have those for you from. So this is Introduction to Leadership. Now that we know what leadership is and what it isn't, here's how you progress. First of all, you have to be a good self-leader. If you cannot manage your own self, you cannot lead others. You cannot have rules for others and then do the contrary, okay? You cannot be that hypocrite. So you have to be authentic. People have to get to know you. In order for me to want to follow someone, I need to know, who am I following? Am I following a serial killer or a Prince Charming? I want to know, right? So accountable. You have to say, I make mistakes. I am not perfect. Influence. That is where your influence comes from. Adding skills. Now that you've done that, you need to add skills. And this is something where this can be very personal. Some people watch YouTube videos. Some people watch TED Talks. Other people read books. Some companies get leadership advisory people in to give you training courses. Any and all of them add some value. But ultimately, it only adds value if you are connecting to that material. You can read a book, and I can read a book from cover to cover and have no idea what I just read. I can listen to a TED Talk while I'm doing something else, and I have no idea what it just said. That's not engaging with the material. You actually have to want to engage with it and understand it. Seek a mentor. And I'm not talking about a mentor who has the title mentor. This can be someone, a sounding board. This can be someone who you look up to, who you think, actually, this person has really good qualities that I find useful. Talk to them. Get your ideas across and say, hey, how am I tracking with this? Or ask them for advice before you have a conversation with someone about something. Ask them for advice. Seek feedback. When you are people, whether you're a line manager, a project manager, a site manager, anybody in a management space, ask for people to give you feedback on how you're doing. That is very, very hard to do. Not many of us are courageous enough to ask other people about feedback. But in order for you to improve, you cannot change what you don't know. It's best thing was wrong. So you need to ask for feedback. And then ultimately teach the next generation. Be that leader who people will say, gosh, that person really had an impact on me. Don't perpetuate bad leadership, because some of us may have inadvertently learned leadership from a manager in our past, for good, bad, or ugly. Let's not perpetuate those ideas. Let's actually do the best job we can, and that takes some skill, commitment, and dedication. Lastly, values. When we come back from a break, we're going to talk about your personal values. And think about, while we're on break, is this now a good time to break, Brigitte?
Yeah.
Okay. Think about 10 personal values that live in your mind. And when I'm talking about values, I'm not talking about something that you do, but something that shapes what is important to you, how you interact with the world. What is important for you? I want 10 of them. Please write them down on the Post-it notes. If there aren't enough Post-it notes, there is a stack at Floriana's table. And when we come back, we're going to do something with those notes, but keep them to yourself. You don't have to share them. Just write 10 things down on a Post-it note and hang on to them.